At the turn of the 20th century, the Spanish philosopher George Santayana famously said that those who cannot remember the past are doomed to repeat it. TUC's long history is a store of knowledge from which to learn. As today's anniversary Sunday recognizes, this church is 146 years old. It's a lot of history to learn from. In general, modern Western society understands time linearly. It conceives of time as an arrow shot from the past into the future, straight, linear, continuing. Modernism believes in progress. As we move along that straight arrow into the future, we learn things, and based on our learning, we improve, we get better, we progress. Unitarian Universalists are deeply invested in that sense of progress, in learning, and in getting better. This idea is built into our conception of interim ministry. We even have a timeline in the shape of an arrow in the concourse today. The transition in between settled ministries is a time for the congregation to reflect on history, identity, and culture, and make decisions about its vision and its future. History is important in the process because it offers us a data source about who you are and what it is that matters to you. Doing this work will help you call a new minister that will lead you into the future, who matches the direction that your congregation is going. So the question is, when we look at the past, what keeps coming up? What stories do you tell yourselves again and again that make you feel proud? And what makes you feel uncomfortable to remember? What do you shy away from? And why? This process that we're involved in contains an implicit assumption that through reflecting on ourselves we can learn and improve. One of the focus points in interim work is heritage, how the congregation has been shaped and formed. But even if you walked in the door today for the first time as a visitor, you can recognize that you're encountering an entire system here that has been formed over years and decades. If you join that system, the heritage will act on you. I've only been here for a few months and already it's acting on me. There is grace in this unfolding process. Walking in here today, a visitor receives, unearned, all the work this congregation has done over the past 146 years. All the best practices, all the lessons learned. Joining you several months ago, there was nothing that I had done to earn any of the gifts that this congregation has amassed over time. I had nothing to do with choosing a famous architect to design this building just before that famous architect got really famous, and therefore getting a beautiful landmark building for a bargain price. I did nothing to earn the accumulated wisdom of powerful and dynamic ministry that has been a part of this church. I had nothing to do with creating the systems that you have in place to care for each other and continue the tradition of Third Unitarian. I did not create the culture of radical welcome that you have here, but I received it. I didn't participate in building the addition to the church or upkeeping a heritage site over the years. I just walked in and received those things unearned, as any visitor here today will too. We've all received gifts from our past. Regardless of the quality of our childhoods or our relationships with our early caretakers, we obviously all survived them. Which means that someone took care of us when we were infants. Someone held us as babies. Someone nursed us and made sure that we didn't eat tacks or crawl into the fire. And whoever took care of us when we were children themselves survived childhood. They were also held as babies, fed, and kept away from the fire. We're all the inheritors of thousands of years of parenting that none of us earned. And all of the parents in the room know that caring for an infant is pretty serious work. And so therefore serious unearned gifts from the past to all of us. We're all alive today because of our absolute dependence on our ancestors. Today is both Dia de los Muertos, a Mexican holiday honoring the dead, particularly dead ancestors, and All Souls Day, a Catholic holiday that also honors the dead. Both holidays recognize the gifts given to us by our ancestors, relatives connected to us by both blood and by relationship. Here at TUC, we're surrounded on the walls by our religious ancestors, our honored and beloved dead. We are indebted. We are indebted to these ancestors, to the ones in our own families, and to ones that we don't even know. We've inherited accumulated culture, our human heritage, knowledge, wisdom, and ways of being. We have all of us been shaped by history, and we experience the grace of it. From something as obvious and technical as medical knowledge, hewn from the work and sacrifice and intelligence of countless nameless people who created a world in which we're less likely to die from disease or childbirth. We're the recipients of the accumulated knowledge of technology. We have running water, we have heat, we have basic sanitation, we have agriculture. None of us earned any of this, but we receive it, handed down from generations of people who worked to make things better. People who looked at systems and said, this isn't working right now. How can I fix it? How can I make life better, easier, more sustainable for my people? We're also the inheritors of the living tradition of Unitarian Universalism. The ancestors of our faith tradition resisted oppression. They formed new, theologically liberal ideas and created space for creative and modern theological thinking. It's okay to be an atheist at Third Unitarian Church because of the work our theological ancestors did to create a faith based on shared feeling, shared ritual, community, and practice rather than doctrine. So we receive this grace from the past on a massive scale, but we also receive it on a more local scale. We receive the grace of the past from our family, the unearned banana bread recipe, the blessing of Nana's jokes, the gift of the family hobby. We also receive the grace of the past in this church, the gifts of the people here, the community already built, the systems in place to keep the church functioning, the building itself, the fact that the church has survived for 146 years. So much energy, time, resources have gone into keeping this place running, and more than running, thriving. I've heard dozens of stories about this dynamic congregation's history. Its history with Austin, its history with integration, with social justice, its history with humanism and atheism, with colorful and influential characters within and without the church, with charismatic and leading ministers, and with each other. The Reverend Brian Covell told me a story about how when a local realtor's house was firebombed in the mid-century for selling houses in white neighborhoods to black families, Third Unitarian Church's minister read about it in the newspaper and went to that realtor to tell him that this church stood with him. Roberta Wilson told me a story about how when radical black youth were organizing in Austin and none of the neighborhood churches would give them space to meet, this church said, "You can meet here." This church is a place of radical welcome. as I've said before, its commitment to social justice and to this neighborhood is long and storied. It continues to draw new people who are attracted to a social justice-oriented, urban, theologically liberal, and radically welcoming church. These stories from the 20th century continue to shape your identity and give us information about who Third Unitarian might be in the 21st century. When we mine the past for information, we ask both, what have you done well, but also, what makes you come alive? Frederick Buechner famously said that the place that we are called to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. What do you do well that makes you come alive, and how does that intersect with what the world needs? Many cultures don't actually understand time as absolutely linear. That's a particularly modern Western conception, the arrow. A straight line from the past to the future, marking progress and lessons learned. Some people instead understand time more cyclically, that our lives move in cycles rather than in an arrow. We can tap into this way of understanding time by looking at patterns, by looking at the way we've cycled through our history. These patterns feed our identity both explicitly and implicitly. The history at TUC includes stories of hope and cooperation, as well as stories of conflict and struggle. That's normal. All groups of humans are comprised of humans. So they make mistakes and they have conflict. But those are not the same thing. Conflict is not necessarily a mistake. It can be a very healthy process of diverse people learning to deal with one another and come to shared purpose. What matters more than whether or not you have had conflict is how you deal with conflict when you do have it, because groups of humans always will. So the question is, can you listen to another point of view and disagree with it without that point of view becoming a threat to who you are? Are you capable of disagreeing even strongly and still staying in relationship? Some of the gifts of the past can feel painful, like the gift of a spouse who gives you an exercise bike for your birthday. What's that supposed to mean? These types of gifts show up as lessons. Opportunities to learn about who you are, how the system is working, and what the consequences of that system's workings are. If you don't like the consequences, then you have to change the system. If you don't change the system, you will end up with the same consequences. One of the lessons from the past that I have recognized, that I've noticed in looking at this congregation, is that you don't always stay in relationship through conflict. There's a pattern in the system that when there is conflict, people leave. This is not terribly surprising. It happens all over the place. It's pretty regular. But the consequence of that pattern happening here is that people are afraid to look at past conflicts, and they're also afraid of having conflict in the present. What the pattern says to me is that there's work to be done in terms of handling conflict, how to deal with it within the system. And that we need to remember that conflict is totally normal. It's a normal part of human relationships and a normal part of all systems. And it's how you deal with the conflict that makes the difference. So do disagreements devolve into ad hominem attacks? Is there an implicit threat that someone will leave if they don't get their way? Are conflicts cast as good versus evil? Are they so potentially explosive that they are avoided until they actually explode? Do parties to a conflict try to pull in allies and expand the conflict throughout the church? These are all ways that a very healthy, normal human process can veer into painful, schism-creating, church-shrinking debacles. So as we look at our history, I am not recommending that we go over the details of every conflict. And we certainly don't need to evaluate who was right or wrong in order to notice a pattern and how it's working in the system. So there's no need for finger pointing or shame or guilt. That's not the work that we're here to do together. We're here to learn and to grow. But in order to do that, we have to be able to be real with each other. We have to be able to disagree thoughtfully and still continue to be in relationship with one another. I have had a number of congregants express their frustration to me that we're doing this interim ministry work of heritage, identity, mission, and vision. You feel like you've been doing this work over the past several years. You've had congregational meetings, you've put your post-it notes up on the board, you've talked about what you want and what you don't want. It might feel frustrating to have to go through this interim process still. You want to start building the church right now and not waste limited resources talking around issues on interim time. This is completely understandable. You love this church. You want to see it grow, and you're afraid that that might not happen if we're sitting around in circles talking about our feelings. It's scary and it's frustrating. You've done reflection work, and now you want to be in the process of building. I understand the sentiment and the fear. Because you love this church, you want it to be growing right now. So how can we work together? How can we use this time while I'm here as your interim? I think there's still more work to be done. You've done a lot of visioning work already, and that's great. What it means is that we can go deeper together. We can really get into some of those patterns and reflecting on them, and also use them to articulate your vision and your mission more clearly, and have it shared throughout the congregation so that anyone who walks in here can walk up to anyone in the congregation and find out who you are and where you're going. We're going to get the elevator speech down. I've heard already why you love it here, and I've heard some individual hopes for the future, but I have not heard a strong, clear, passionate, shared mission of what TUC's purpose is in the world. A mission is the essence of why you exist, your reason for being Third Unitarian Church. Your vision is the long-term change that you hope will result from the work that you do in the world, from your being and doing Third Unitarian Church. So as an example of what I'm talking about, I have heard again and again, I've read it in the documents, I got it from the Sustainability Task Force, I hear it from you at coffee hour, how committed you are to Austin, to this location, to being in this neighborhood. That you stayed in Austin as part of your identity, as part of who you are. So you need to be able to articulate why. Why is that important to you? What is your mission here? What are you doing in Austin? What is your vision for your future work here? The results of your previous visioning work begin to address this, and I hope that we can build on them in our time here together. But they need to be driven by a foundational why. What is your purpose as a church? So right now, your stated mission is printed on the cover of your order of service. I'll read it for you, and you can read along. You have reference materials. TUC is the urban face of liberal religion in Chicago. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. With free minds and open hearts, our congregational family will create beauty, confront injustice, and give comfort and courage to people as diverse as this world. That's beautiful. I love that. I'm inspired by it. Is it guiding the work of the church? Is it grounding your decisions, the decisions you make about programs and committees and what you do? Do you share it with new people who walk in the door? Do new people here even know what it is? How is this mission driving TUC forward? As we look at Third Unitarian Church's history throughout November, we're going to look at how TUC answered through its being and through its doing what it has meant to be a religiously liberal urban church in the 20th century. When did TUC succeed in carrying out an urban religious liberal mission? And what patterns consistently obstructed it from being effective in that mission? And then we're going to look at how those answers to what it has done in the 20th century inform us as we move into the 21st century. So you can begin today by writing your important memories down on the timeline and the concourse. And we're going to continue together next week at the 10 a.m. forum, using that timeline to create a shared story, a shared narrative of TUC. After the service next week, we'll go deeper and look at what this congregation's deep gladness and deep gifts are, and how that deep gladness might meet the world's deep hunger in the 21st century. May it be so, and blessed be.